Hello and a warm welcome to yet another in the series Reflections here on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. I'm Richard Spendler, and each week I spend some time talking to a guest about the way their lives have gone. This week my guest seems rather less a person than perhaps an institution. He rates 1,000 words in Who's Who in the theatre, and the list of his theatrical credits is absolutely endless. In the last 35 years he's appeared in almost as many films, and that lays aside his theatre and television work. His fans are spread probably all the way around the world. Join me then in welcoming, if you will, the actor Donald Sinden. Donald, where and when were you born?
Where was I born? Actually, I've had to live there all my life because my family, on both sides, my mother's and my father's, for centuries back have been Sussex people. And in the First World War, my father was in the Navy and stationed in Devonport, in Devonshire. And my mother went down and lived in Plymouth while he was in the Navy, so that every time he returned to port, she was on the spot, rather than having to travel back to Sussex. And they loved Plymouth, Devonport, so much that after the war, they stayed on. And my sister and myself were both born there. I was happened to be born there, but I'm a Saxonian, you see, almost born and bred. And but it's one of those sad things. On my passport, it says born in Plymouth, you see. Which indeed is true, but that was in 1923.
So you're actually stuck with Devon, whether you like it or not?
Whether I like it or not, yes.
What was your father's, as it were, full-time profession?
He was a chemist. And he was, oddly enough, he was in training, what do we call it, apprenticed, when he joined the Navy in the war, and then he stayed on as a chemist after the war.
Other children of the family?
Yeah, I've got a sister, as I say, born in Plymouth, and then we moved back to Sussex when I was 2, 1925, and my brother was born in 1927. In Sussex, so he can claim to be a true Saxonian. Yes, damn it.
You really do grind and axe about that, don't you?
Oh, I do, yes, it's really upset me, that one, yes.
Can you then draw...
Well, especially as over the last few years I've been delving very heavily into genealogy. And back and back and back with both sides of my family, all Sussex, the whole way back. And the most extraordinary thing, my parents met in Hove, in about 1915, I think it was, and the families happened to be living in Hove there, but tracing them back in around about 1600, both their families were living within a mile and a half of each other back then.
Let me invite you, if you will, to draw us a charcoal drawing of your home as a youngster.
Well, I'm glad you say a charcoal drawing, because charcoal is black and white, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I happen to be colourblind. So it's, I'm glad you said that. It's a great mishap being colourblind. You know, oddly enough, my grandfather was on my mother's side. His daughter, my mother, she was colourblind, and so am I. But it doesn't really worry one, because, I mean, traffic lights, as far as I'm concerned, are 1 blue and 2 reds. So whenever it's red, I stop. When it goes blue, I go, you see. So it's fair enough. But now a charcoal drawing of my childhood. It was advisedly, an idyllic village called Ditchling in Sussex. And it was, oh dear, I remember every corner of it. And this beautiful little village nestling in the foot of the South Downs, 8 miles north of Brighton. But the fields around, going up onto the South Downs still to me is one of those magical spots, because the South Downs are in a human scale. The hills have got to be within a human scale, and the South Downs are. And there's a little winding Roman road that leads from the top of the Downs down into the village of Ditchling, winding hairpin bends all the way down. And when I was a boy, aged about 10, 12, I suppose, you weren't considered one of the gang unless you came down that road from the top to the bottom on a bicycle with no brakes. And woe betide anyone who couldn't. I mean, he was out. Oh, dear me. One had to walk the course, rather like these show jumpers, when they were walking the course to see where one could hit the bank and use that to slow you down. And Little Lodge Hill was a little hill within the village, and that's where there were wonderful trees to climb there. And also hiding places, dens, as we used to call them, that we thought nobody else knew about. Of course, every child from time immemorial has known about them. And a magical bit. And, of course, we were living in the High Street, And one used to be able to virtually run out of the front door, straight across the road when I was a child. No problem at all. And we saw about 2 cars a day, and if you saw one, I mean, it was the duty of the driver to watch out for boys running across the road. But now, of course, one wouldn't dare do it. They would go through there at a rate of knots.
Were there any theatrical connections in the family at all?
Before my generation, not really. My grandfather's cousin, whatever that makes her to me, was a Gaiety girl by the name of Topsy Sinden. And she died in 1950. And we've got photographs of her in her costumes at the Gaiety Theatre. And that was the only forebear. Then in my father and my uncle especially, his brother, were great, very keen amateur actors. And then my brother and sister were desperately keen in the amateur theatre. They performed in everything. And my cousins, my uncle's children, they were all amateur actors. And I was the only one who didn't want to know. But this leads me through very nicely to how did I sort of start on this business. Because I was the only member of the family who was not interested in the theatre. I used to go and see other members of my company, my family, performing, but not for me. Until my cousin, who was the same age as I, was called up for the RAF in the war. And he telephoned me. He was in the middle of rehearsals for an amateur play. And he said, would I take on his part? And I said, no, you got the wrong one. I mean, you are my brother or my sister or something, not me. He said, but he and I were exactly the same age. So he said, no, you're the only one who can do it. And I said, but what do I have to do? And he said, very simple. All you do is learn some lines and go on and say them. So I said, is that all? And he said, yes. So I did. I learned the lines and went on for 2 performances at the Brighton Little Theatre, age 17. And one of the performances was seen by a local impresario, Charles F. Smith. He was the director of the Theatre Royal in Brighton, and he was very distressed by the way that ENSA was being run. ENSA, you won't remember, but ENSA used to have categories of shows, A, B, C, and D. And if you were in one of the major cities, you got an A show, which would come to the local theatre, working right down the scale until you got a D show. If you were stuck on an ack site on the top of Beachy Head, you got a D show, which was a soprano and a conjurer, you know. And he thought that this was totally unfair, that people in the forces should have precisely the same form of entertainment, whoever they were, or wherever they happened to be stationed. And so he formed his own company called MISA, the Mobile Entertainments for the Southern Area. And this man, Charles Smith, came to see, as I say, one of the performances I was giving, and asked me to join his company. Well, I thought it was because I was a genius, you see. I didn't discover until very much later that it was because, being wartime, he couldn't get anybody else. And my cousin, as I say, went to the RAF. I, coincidentally, was just being turned down on my medical because of asthma. I went out for a naval medical. I went for a naval medical because my father had been in the Navy, and rather than I sort of follow on, it would have been.
Yes.
But I was turned down. And again, you won't remember, but if you weren't in the forces, you had to do war work of some category. Making munitions was the top category, working down the hill. And I was offered the alternative of answering a telephone in a report centre or being an ambulance attendant. So I told Charles Smith, I'm sorry about this. He said, but just a minute, he said. My company qualifies as a grade higher. So I informed the authorities, joined his company, and I stayed with them for nearly 4.5 years.
Can you tell me then about your first professional appearance?
Yeah, well, that was with MISA, you see, because it's frightfully difficult. My story gets complicated here because it was professional. Everybody in the company was professional, and indeed I was paid. Mm-hmm. A negligible amount. I was paid 7 shillings and 6pence a performance.
All that?
All that. 7 and 6 a performance, which is, 35p or something like that a performance. And if you did 6 a week, you were in money, you know. What are 6, 7 and 6 is? 45 shillings a week. Yes, I was getting paid for that. And so it was fondly hoped in my family that I would be an architect. My grandfather was an architect, my mother's father. And but everything had to stop, as with so many people. I had to stop because of the war. I had become a wartime actor, but I still didn't know if, come the end of the war, if I was going to continue with it or devote myself to being an actor. However, I call that my first professional performance. It was in a play called George and Margaret at the Theatre Royal in Brighton. I was playing Dudley. I don't even know the play. It's a very, very funny play, written by Gerald Savary. And oddly enough, my brother later on joined the same company, and so did my cousin. And George and Margaret was the great standby, and there were 3 young men in it. I was playing Dudley, and at one point my cousin was playing, he was playing, what's his name, Roger. My brother was playing Claude. And we got a little fed up with playing our own parts, so we learnt each other's. And so we wouldn't tell anyone what we were going to play until the performance began, and we'd suddenly come onto the stage as a totally different character. Anyway, it was fun for us, but murder for the rest of the company. It was quite extraordinary because we were playing in all different sorts of theatres. As I say, playing in a Niston hut on the top of Beachy Head, or large theatres in Southampton, Portsmouth. One of my unfavourite moments was when the whole of the south coast was where we expected Hitler to land. And we went down to play at Pevensey. And it was great fun. We used to go out in a bus from Brighton each night. Half the seats had been removed, and we used to put the scenery and the furniture in that half, and the actors would sit in the other half, and off we would set to some unknown destination, because the troupe gatherings, were highly top secret at the time. But as I was a Sussex boy, and had spent all my youth cycling around Sussex, when we started off from Brighton, the Theatre Royal, an army driver would take over. All the blinds were pulled down so that nobody would know where we were going. But of course I knew exactly, because I say, now just a minute, we're going along the Lewis Road, yes, through Ringmer, yes, turn left to Uckfield. And I could, if Hitler had wanted to know, he could only have telephoned me and I would have told him where everybody was. Extraordinary. He never thought of it. You see, that just shows you why we won the war. Yes, I was telling you about Pevensey. And we arrived an hour and a half before the performance. The chaps had to put up the scenery and move the furniture in, and the girls looked after all the props and the knives and forks and the plates and things. And we'd finished a good hour and a half before the performance, so I went for a walk. We weren't allowed within 10 miles of the coast in those days, you see. And I went for a little walk on the beach. And suddenly I heard a stentorian roar behind me. Stand still! So I stopped. He said, don't move! So I didn't. He said, how did you get there? I said, what do you mean? And I was in the middle of a minefield. And by sheer unbelievable luck, I'd missed a mine, you see. And I had to stand absolutely still without moving an inch while this man went back to the office, came back with a map of where all the mines were, and he talked me back.
Donald, come the end of the war, what then?
Yes, well, that did land me in a bit of a problem, because was I going to go back to being... I say being I'd never been an architect. I'd been at school when the war began. You see. But should I become an architect, or now I'd got the bug, and I really rather enjoyed this acting, and the girls were much more attractive in the theatre. I discovered that already, and Charles Smith didn't feel qualified to advise me that I should devote myself to a theatrical career, but he was a great friend of a man called James Agate, who was the dramatic critic of the Sunday Times. And he asked Agate to come and see some of the performances I was giving for Misa, and it would be left to him to pass judgment. And I then met Agate, and he gave me an audition, as it were. He asked me to read some Shakespeare. He suddenly thrust a volume of Shakespeare into my hand, opened at Buckingham's Farewell from Richard III. And he said, read that. So I'd never even read the play. I'd never read any Shakespeare before. And I didn't know what the play was about. So I read it. And there was a long pause, and he said, yes. Yes, he said, it's an interpretation. It's the wrong one, but it's an interpretation. He said, go ahead, be an actor. But he advised me very strongly to go into Shakespeare, because it's the only way to learn your business in Shakespeare. So, 1946 season at Stratford-upon-Avon, a man called Sir Barry Jackson was the new incumbent, the new director, and he was known to both Agate and Charles Smith. So both of them wrote to Barry Jackson. Would they take on this young fella? when I was with heavy guns like that, poor Barry Jackson hadn't got a leg to stand on. He had to take me. So indeed, I did. This left me with some time to spare between the end of the war, because I forgot to tell you that with Misa, I was sent out to, when the war ended in Europe, we were over there at Schleswig-Holstein when the war ended in Europe, and they immediately sent us out to India and Burma because the war was still on out there. And so I came back, and I still had time to spare before 1946 season. So I went up to Leicester Rep, for about 9 months, weekly rep. Wonderful, wonderful training, wonderful training. But so off I went to Stratford to embark upon Shakespeare for the first time. And I was one of those boys, like a lot, who thought Shakespeare was the biggest waste of time when I was at school. Oh, God, what boring stuff. Why did we have to analyze this play or something? But suddenly, to be at Stratford, in Stratford, the town where Shakespeare was born, married, died, buried, to be there where he wrote the plays. Wonderful, the feeling that you have in that place of having the privilege, there's no other word for it, the privilege of speaking Shakespeare's lines suddenly hit me right between the eyes. The greatest experience of my life, I think. Wonderful. And so I was in 8 plays that season, and then the following season I was asked back again, 1947, 9 plays that season, and I suddenly became a Shakespearean actor. That was the life for me. And then shortly I discovered, following that immediately, I went into the Old Vic, 1948, at the New Theatre in London. 1949, I was down at Bristol Old Vic. Then I went into a play called The Heiress at the Haymarket Theatre with Peggy Ashcroft and Ralph Richardson. And that was the longest run I've ever done. I was in that for 19 months. 644 performances on the trot. And the funny thing is that 2 weeks before we'd finished, there were only 2 of us who'd never missed a performance. One of the actresses and myself. We'd never missed a performance on right the way through. And it was neck and neck race towards the end. And poor thing, she fell off a bus and broke her leg. I didn't push her, I promise. I didn't push her. But I was the only one left who'd never been off. And, oh, golly, I was so nervous for that last week. I daren't cross the road. I had to complete that run. So by completing it, 644 performances, I created a minor little record at the time by giving more consecutive performances at the Haymarket Theatre than any other actor since the theatre was built in 1812.
Good Lord.
Not bad, is it?
Excellent. Of the 3 essential media available to you, which do you prefer to work?
Do you mean films, television?
Films, television, yeah.
Well, there's no doubt at all about that, because if I can tie this on to the end of the previous anecdote there about Shakespeare. The Heiress had been a classical play, and I suddenly discovered this terrifying thing that the theatre was divided into 2 categories. You were either a modern actor or a classical actor. If you were a modern actor, you did the works of Noel Coward, Terence Rattigan and people, or you did the classics. And very few people bridged the gap between the 2. But all of my time in Misa, I'd been a modern actor. Suddenly, for the 1946 to 1951, I'd been a classical actor. I had to fight to get my foot back into the modern theatre camp. It was extraordinary. But already I was appreciating the fact that I have interrupted you. You asked me which of the 3 media is the favourite. Without any doubt at all, the theatre has to be first and foremost. When I'm asked a sort of similar sort of question, I always say to people, suppose your sport were football. And I said to you, now look, I can give you 2 tickets to the cup final at Wembley, or you can watch it on television. Which would you rather? Mm-hmm. Everyone says, but of course, go to Wembley.
Yes.
And that's exactly the difference between the theatre and the television. It's live, it's happening now. It will never happen again precisely the same. Whereas if you see a film or television 500 times, it will not alter by 1 iota.
Can I then alter that slightly and say that whilst I accept that the theatre is your first love, can you say that medium has brought you the most success, or has another done that?
Again, one gets back to success. What is success? Is it financial? Is it world fame, whatever that might mean, or is it the actual kudos attached?
Acclaim, perhaps, would be a better word then.
Acclaim. You see, I spent a lot of time in the theatre, and when I was in a play called Present Laughter, I was in that for a year, which was seen by roughly, in that time, 400,000 people in a year, doing it every night. At the end of the run, we put it on television. We televised it as a play. And in one night, it was seen by 12 million people. I mean, this is absurd, isn't it? 12 million compared with a year's hard slog being seen by 400,000. Well, now, the theatre medium, every one of those performances was different. Just imperceptibly different, but different. And the excitement of being in the theatre at the same time. But nevertheless, one cannot get away from the fact that one's in this business to be known, to have one's name known, one's value at the box office depends on how well you're known. So therefore one's got to do things like television and films. But I think actors, if they only had the choice, would only do theatre.
Can I put one other question to you that occurs to me since you mentioned Noel Coward's work? Did you know Noel Coward?
Yes, met him on many occasions.
What sort of a man was he?
Oh, astonishing. I mean, a man of many, many parts. Astonishing. For somebody to have written the plays he did when he was in his early 20s, Private Lives and The Vortex and things like that, when he was not more than 23 or something.
Was he a genius?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And the strange thing one's discovered about Coward is that whenever England is in trouble, I say England advisedly, I mean Britain is in trouble, we need to laugh. And Coward has always been there at the moments of crisis. When he wrote his first great comedies, Private Lives, for instance, it was at the time of the general strike and the Wall Street crash, 26, 29 time. General strike, and it was terrifying. So England, it was all pretty awful. Then things looked up a bit in the 30s, and Coward didn't really write any plays, or not all of them were put on. So suddenly England's at war, Britain's at war. Immediately he writes Present Laughter, Blithe Spirit, and England wants to laugh again. It's only when you're very, very buoyant can you afford to be morbid.
Can I... I'll perhaps ask you one other question then before we move back to you, and I want to do pretty quickly. How did you rate Coward against Rattigan?
Oh, it's rather an unfair question, really, because one can't. They're two totally different playwrights, both brilliant in their own ways. Rattigan was never as funny as Coward, but Coward was never as moving as Rattigan. Mm-hmm. Two totally different people. Yes. I spent 2 terms at a drama school. Yes, way back. Don't worry about that. Yeah. But the point is, students in those days were taught, young actors were taught, that there was a way of doing plays of different periods. There was a way to do Shakespearean plays, another way to do Jacobean, Restoration, 18th century, you name it, right the way through. And it took me a long time to realize that you can't say that each period has a style. It's each playwright has a style, each individual playwright. And when you think that Noel Coward was writing at the same time as Samuel Beckett or Harold Pinter, you can't play them both the same. They're both entirely different. So therefore, each playwright must have a style. So since that discovery on my part, I'm sure everybody else knew it all the time, I made it my business to do plays by as many different playwrights as possible.
Right, to come back then fully to you, as it were, you have in fact toured most extensively. Outside of England, where would you prefer to work?
Outside of England? Mm-hmm. Oh dear. And now this isn't just a sort of desert island question, is it? It's not. As an actor.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, unfortunately, as an English-speaking actor, the finest theatre in the world, the finest television in the world is done in England. I must be beware of this England, but I claim to be English as different from British. No, but there isn't anywhere else that one would like to work at all, really.
What a marvellous answer. I don't think we need to ask you any more about that. You've answered it beautifully. The vast majority of people, in fact, see you in comedy. Now, how easy do you find this to do?
Oh dear, the comedy is the most difficult. Most difficult of the lot. An actor of the 18th century, David Garrick, put his finger right on it when he once said that, he said, any fool can play Hamlet, but comedy is a very serious business. And it's perfectly true. It's extraordinary that one discovers that at Stratford one has the pleasure of speaking his words, but an actor's only got to come onto the stage and say, to be or not to be, that is the question. And then half the audience clutches the other half and says, isn't it marvellous? You see, was not the actor they're talking about the Shakespeare, you see. But the most difficult of all styles is farce. That's the most difficult of the lot, worse than any form of comedy. And my golly, I know I've played them all. And I've played a lot of Shakespearean leads, and I now have proved to myself that farce is the most difficult, because if you're playing King Lear, as I've done, is rather like running the marathon. But if you're doing a farce, it's like doing the 100-meter hurdles. And you mustn't knock a very, very fast, and you mustn't knock a hurdle over. Well, mind you, that you're allowed to do that if you're running, aren't you? But in the theatre, you mustn't. Once you've knocked a hurdle over, that's it.
Yes, I take the point. Your name in the eyes of the public link you with some of the greatest theatrical personalities of our time. Now, that is not an overstatement. It's about the truth. Can you tell us then why? How does this happen? What is there that these few, and I include you amongst them, have?
Well, that's very flattering of you to say, to include me amongst them. I've been very privileged over the years to have worked with some incredible actors, wonderful ones. And dear me, I can talk about them, but I can't talk about me. Do you see what I mean? An old actor, Balliol Holloway, once said to me that he'd seen Irving play, Henry Irving. And he was saying that there aren't any great actors about today. He said, not, you didn't see Irving, and you didn't see Beerbohm Tree, and Forbes Robertson, you should have seen them. And I said, come on, Bay. I said, now tell me, what is your definition of a great actor? And he thought for a minute, and he said, now, look here. He said, at this moment, you're playing at the Haymarket Theatre. He said, if you look out into that auditorium, the circles and the boxes, it's all gilt, isn't it? The ceiling is gilt. Front of the boxes, front of the circles, gilt. He said, when a great actor walks onto the stage, that lights up. It's a lovely definition, isn't it?
It's fabulous.
I mean, you can't explain it, but it's perfectly true. Oh dear, but now you're trying to put me with...
Well, it's no good beating about the bush, because that's where you belong.
But I can't... Isn't it strange one can't analyse oneself? I suppose it's... Oh, no, I don't know. I really can't put a finger on that. Experience, I think, is an enormous, of enormous importance, because I've always said to the young actors, don't pick and choose what you do. Don't think, I'll only do Shakespeare, or I'll only do plays with great messages to them. No, do whatever comes next, because it's all experience. So much so that over the years, I've been an actor now for 46 years, and over those years, I've appeared in most branches of entertainment.
Well, I'm afraid the bad news is that's as far as we can go in this week's edition of Reflections. The good news is that Donald will be joining us again next week to continue the narrative. In the meantime, my thanks to Donald for this week, but most especially, as always, my thanks to you for listening. Bye-bye, and do take care.